You ever watch your own child erupt like a volcano right in front of guests? Well, I did. And that night, the night my son told me to pack my bags, was the night everyone finally learned the truth I'd been carrying for 3 long, heavy years. Now, before I dive all the way into this mess, darling, go on and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories that prove our best chapters don't stop just 'cause we've got a few laugh lines, well, you're in the right place. This is the old woman's stories after all. All right, come closer. Let me tell you what happened. My son slammed his glass down so hard, the stem snapped clean off. Red wine splashed across my dining room rug like blood from a fresh wound. That's it, Mom. Pack your bags. Nobody needs you in this house. 12 people froze mid-bite, forks suspended halfway to their mouths, staring at my son as if he had been swapped with some wild stranger. But me, I just sat there, calm as cold tea. I'd been waiting 3 years for the day he'd lose control like this. And now that it arrived, instead of heartbreak, all I felt was a cold, steady kind of relief. My husband, Mark, rose slowly beside me, not with anger, no, that came later, but with a sorrow so deep it could have cracked the floor beneath us. He didn't say a word yet, just looked at our son, the way men look at train wrecks they saw coming miles before impact. Across the table, my daughter-in-law stared down at her plate, face burning red, hands trembling in her lap. My sister tapped my knee twice under the table, our old signal. I nodded once, yes, tonight. Tonight, everything comes out. My son, Liam, started pacing behind his chair, his expensive suit wrinkling, his tie drooping like he'd been wrestling with it instead of wearing it. He'd clearly been drinking since late afternoon. Anyone could see it. The shiny watch on his wrist glinted under the chandelier. I knew exactly how he paid for it, with our money. "Sit down," I said softly. He laughed, that sharp, defensive kind of laugh that lets you know someone's terrified on the inside. "Oh, I'm making a scene. You've been breathing down my neck for months, showing up at the company office, digging into accounts that don't concern you, acting like you know anything about running a business." I let him rant. You learn a lot when guilty people think they can talk their way out of a corner. Back in the day, my grandmother used to say, "Give a liar enough rope, and he'll tie his own noose." She was right. Our friend Robert looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. His wife nudged him, whispering something urgent under her breath. The entire room could sense something was off, but only I knew how deep the rot went. You waste money on fancy dinners, stupid events, and overpriced nonsense when the company is barely staying afloat. He barked at me, barely staying afloat, because he'd been draining it like a leaking bucket. But I didn't say that, not yet. Instead, I lifted my water glass, took a slow, unbothered sip, and set it back down, like I had all the time in the world. "Well," I said, gentle as honey, "I was hoping to talk to you about the company anyhow. I looked at the discretionary accounts last week and found some interesting entries." His face changed just for a blink. Fear, pure sharp fear, flashed across his eyes before anger swallowed it back up. But I'd been watching for that exact moment, and I caught it. "Interesting things," he mocked, trying to puff himself up. "Mom, accounting irregularities are complicated. They involve consulting fees, equipment investments, things you clearly don't understand." "Mm-hmm," I said. "Consulting fees. Yes, I noticed quite a few of those. Companies I've never heard of." The room went dead quiet. Even the chandelier seemed to stop humming. "Well," I said, tilting my head just a little, "I tried looking up those companies online. The consulting firms you keep billing. Funny thing is, not a single website, no registration records, not even a bad Yelp review. You could have heard a feather drop. Every eye in that room snapped straight to him. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like someone pulled the plug out of him. He tried to laugh, but it came out like a chair leg snapping. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "I don't need to explain basic business procedures to someone who's never worked a real job a day in her life." And that's when he grabbed another wine glass and slammed it down. It detonated in his hand. Glass everywhere. A bright slice of red cut across his palm, but he didn't even flinch. He just jabbed that bleeding finger toward me like it was a weapon. "Pack your bags. Get out. No one wants you here." The restaurant noise, the clinking dishes, even the air conditioning hum. Everything went dead quiet. I watched one single drop of his blood fall onto the white tablecloth and spread into an ink-dark blossom. Strangely, my heartbeat stayed perfectly steady. I'd lived this moment in my head so many nights, staring at the ceiling while my husband slept, that it almost felt like I was watching a play instead of living it. That's when Mark, my husband, finally stood up, not with drama, not with shouting, just a slow, deliberate rise that made every person at that table straighten their spine. Then he reached under the table and pulled out a thick manila folder. I hadn't even noticed he brought it. He set it gently, almost lovingly, right in front of our son. A soft thud. Funny how something so quiet can sound louder than a scream. "Open it," Mark said, just 2 words, but they landed like a judge's verdict. My daughter-in-law's breath hitched. Tears streamed silently down her cheeks. All that shame she'd been burying finally breaking through. Our son's hand shook as he reached for the folder, blood dripping down his wrist, streaking across the cover. He flipped it open and froze. Confusion first, recognition next, and then pure, wide-eyed terror. He flipped to the next page, and another, and another. His breath got fast and shallow, his fingers trembling so hard the papers rattled. I leaned forward slightly. 3 years, I said softly. "I've been documenting everything for 3 years." His blood smeared across the spreadsheets as he clutched them. Those red fingerprints looked like guilt made visible. But in my mind, I wasn't in that restaurant anymore. I was back 3 years earlier, on a chilly Tuesday in March, standing outside my husband's office with a container of homemade chicken soup I'd made because he'd been coming down with something. He didn't know I planned to stop by. Nobody did. His assistant told me he was in a meeting, so I figured I'd just leave the soup on his desk with a little note. But as I walked down the hallway, I passed our son's office, and the door was cracked open. Odd, because he wasn't supposed to be there. According to him, he was in Philadelphia, meeting with a client. He'd said it so casually over Sunday dinner, I had no reason to doubt him. But the sound of his voice made me pause. He sounded desperate. Another voice came through the speaker phone, a man irritated and impatient. "You'd better cover this by Friday. The casino doesn't care about your excuses, and you're already 3 weeks late." Casino. I almost dropped the soup right there. My son always mocked gamblers, said they didn't understand math, called casinos taxes for the statistically challenged, and yet, there he was. "I'll get it," he whispered urgently. "I just need to move some funds around from the discretionary accounts. My parents never check those too closely. They pretend to understand the business, but trust me, they don't." My parents. He said it with such arrogance, such certainty, such contempt, like we were fools. I stood frozen, soup turning cold in my hands, as something deep inside me shifted. Not anger, not heartbreak, something colder, something patient. And I walked away from that door without pushing it open, because right then, I knew I would need time, I would need proof, and I would need patience. a lot of patience. 2 years. 2 years of watching my own child rob us in slow, widening circles while pretending to love us over Sunday dinner. My folder, once a thin file I hid behind an old box of winter scarves, had grown into a full 3-inch binder. Every page was numbered, dated, and cross-referenced. I had built a case that any prosecutor would salivate over. But still I waited, because the worst was yet to come. It happened on a windy Thursday in October. I remember because the leaves outside were scraping across the driveway like restless fingers. My husband walked into the kitchen holding his phone, his face pale in a way I had never seen. "Carol," he said, "you need to see this." Our son had requested a wire transfer, $120,000. Coded as legal compliance restructuring. The approval was routed to my husband, who had final sign-off, but attached to the request, mistakenly left visible, was an internal note: move funds to temporary account. Clear audit flags before mom checks books. Mom. He meant me. My hands began to shake, not from fear, but from something colder. He knew I was watching. And instead of stopping, he was getting smarter. I sat down, forced myself to breathe, and opened my laptop. This was no longer recklessness. This was escalation. That night, after my husband fell asleep, restless and whimpering, like a man dreaming of drowning, I went back to my folder. I added the new evidence, adjusted my timelines, updated the transaction web I had created on my office wall with red strings and pinned notes. And somewhere between 2 and 3 a.m., as I stared at the growing map of our son's betrayal, a realization settled over me like fog. He was no longer stealing from the company. He was preparing to burn it down to cover his tracks. The next month proved me right. A series of equipment malfunctions, a mysterious data loss on the accounting server, and a sudden push from my son to modernize the company's reporting systems, all pointed to one thing: he was laying the groundwork for a complete financial wipeout. If he succeeded, not only would the missing money vanish into the digital grave he created, but he would also gain full control of the company. Once he forced us into dependency on his new systems. I realized then that my son wasn't acting out of desperation. He wasn't trapped in addiction. He wasn't confused. He wasn't making mistakes. He was building an empire out of our bones. And so I made one final decision. I closed the binder, locked it in the bottom drawer of my desk, and swore to myself that before this was over, my son would face consequences he could not charm, lie, or manipulate his way out of. Not because I wanted revenge, not even because he deserved punishment, but because if I didn't stop him, he would destroy everything we had built, including himself. I loved my son, but love was no longer enough. It was time to end this. "You were building a case," she repeated quietly. But this time the words weren't admiration. They weren't gratitude. They were accusation. She pushed her chair back, not harshly, but slowly, like someone stepping away from a fire that had suddenly grown too large. Her hands trembled as she wiped her cheeks, and she looked at me as if I had become a stranger. "All this time," she whispered, "you watched him lie to me, steal from me, trap me, and you didn't warn me." Her voice cracked on the last word. Warning. A simple word. A simple expectation. But nothing about this was simple. "I couldn't," I said, forcing myself to remain calm, steady. "If I confronted him too soon, he would have destroyed the evidence, or blamed you, or accused us of trying to sabotage him." She shook her head, tears sliding down her face again. But these were different. Not grief, not fear, betrayal. "You could have saved me," she whispered. "You could have saved my kids." Her pain hit me like a physical blow, because she wasn't wrong. I had watched my son destroy himself. I had watched him drag his wife with him. I had watched him put their children in a home made of financial lies and emotional manipulation. But I also knew that what I was building wasn't just a case, it was a shield. One that she would need as much as we did. "Listen to me," I said softly. "I know you feel abandoned. I know you feel alone. But I promise you, what's in this folder is the only thing that will protect you when this goes to court." She looked at the thick binder again, her breath shaking. "This isn't just a little evidence," I continued. "This is the kind of proof that ends cases before they even reach trial. The kind that forces settlements. The kind that makes lawyers tell their clients to plead guilty." She swallowed hard. "And it will protect your children." That was when her expression changed. Not forgiveness, not relief, but something steadier, like resolve trying to push through fear. She reached out with trembling fingers and touched the top page, the one with the first $24,000 transaction. Her size scanned the dates, the account numbers, the forged signatures. "This is enough to ruin him," she said quietly. I nodded. "Yes, and you're willing to do that to your son?" I felt the question like a knife, not because it wasn't fair, but because it was the one I had asked myself every night for 3 years. "I'm willing," I said slowly, "to stop a man who is destroying everyone he touches." She sat back down, her hands still shaking, but her breathing steadier now. "What do we do?" she asked. It was the first time she had said "we" since arriving at my house. I turned the folder toward her, flipping to the section I had prepared months ago, but never thought I'd share with anyone. The escape plan, legal contacts, financial steps, documentation she would need for custody, backup evidence stored at a secure location, a timeline, a strategy. Her eyes widened as she read. "You planned all this?" she whispered. "Yes, 3 years ago, long before she ever cried in my kitchen." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she straightened her shoulders, wiped her face, and took a deep, steady breath. "Then let's finish this," she said. There was no fear in her voice now, no fragility, just a quiet, burning strength. And in that moment, I realized something that chilled me deeper than anything I had discovered in the spreadsheets. My son didn't just underestimate me, he underestimated his wife. And together, we were about to become the two people he never saw coming. My son's throat bobbed as he swallowed, his eyes darting from the pictures to my face, then to his father's, searching for softness, for mercy, for anything. He found none. He lifted one shaking hand, the uninjured one, and pushed another photo aside, like he couldn't stand to look at it. But the next page was worse. A scanned copy of the second mortgage, the one with his wife's forged signature. The blood drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. "That," he whispered, pointing at the document with a trembling finger. "That looks worse than it is. I was going to tell you, both of you. Once things stabilized," my husband repeated, leaning forward. "You've stolen more than $200,000 from this company. Do you think that stabilizes?" The room was silent, except for my son's ragged breathing. I watched him, studied him, the way I had studied spreadsheets, bank logs, timestamps, trying to understand who he had become, trying to find even a trace of the boy I once knew. But there was nothing, just a desperate man cornered by the truth. He flipped another page, and this time he froze entirely. Court-ready summaries, prepared by Margaret, detailed breakdowns of every fraudulent action, labeled clearly in black ink. Count 1, corporate embezzlement. Count 2, wire fraud. Count 3, bank fraud. Count 4, identity forgery. Count 5, criminal financial manipulation. His fingers twitched as he skimmed the charges, and he whispered, "No, no, no." like chanting a prayer that might undo the reality in front of him. "You're trying to ruin my life," he choked out suddenly, looking up at me with eyes full of betrayal. "You're doing this on purpose. Your own son. You want to send me to prison." I leaned back slightly, not out of fear, but out of exhaustion. "My son," I said quietly, "you ruined your own life. We are simply done hiding it." His breathing turned shallow, almost panicked. Then his gaze jerked to his wife across the table. "You knew," he hissed. "You knew they were doing this. You were in on it. You let them set me up." She didn't flinch, not even an inch. Her voice was steady, steady in a way I had never heard from her before. "If by set you up, you mean gathering proof of the crimes you committed against everyone in this family, then yes, I did." The betrayal on his face shifted into something darker, a brewing storm. He started, standing up so quickly his chair scraped the floor. But my husband stood too, slowly, silently, not with anger, with dignity. "My son," he said softly, "sit down." For a moment, I thought my son might challenge him, but then he saw it, the steel in his father's expression, the line he had finally crossed. He sat back down, hard. I reached forward and flipped the next page myself. It was time. "This," I said, tapping the final sheet, "is a full timeline of your activities. 3 years worth, verified, documented, and cross-referenced." My son stared at the page, but his eyes were unfocused, like he was sinking underwater. I continued, "At 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, your wife will be filing for divorce." He jerked like he'd been slapped, and at 9:05, I added, my voice low but unwavering, "The criminal case will be submitted to the district attorney's office." He made a sound, a small strangled mix of disbelief and terror. "We gave you every chance," my husband said, "every opportunity to stop, and you didn't." My son rubbed a hand over his face, his breath hitching. He looked around the table, the guests, the evidence, the ruined life lying open in front of him. How could you do this to me?" he whispered. I met his eyes, and the truth was simple. "We didn't do this to you," I said. "You did this to yourself. We are just finally done protecting you from the consequences." The room felt colder, heavier, full of the weight of what came next. And tomorrow? Tomorrow would begin the war he never thought his mother had the strength to fight. My son's chair scraped against the floor as he finally stood, though his knees looked like they might give out. The officers flanked him, one on each side. For a moment, he stared straight ahead, breathing fast, like he still believed someone, anyone might step in and stop this. That someone had always been me, but not anymore. "Mom," he whispered, turning to me with a look I had never seen before. Not anger, not arrogance, but pure panic. "Please, don't let them do this. Don't let them take me." My husband exhaled shakily beside him, but said nothing. I met my son's eyes and felt nothing. No softness, no maternal instinct to shield him. Only the cold, heavy truth of what he had become. "You did this," I said quietly. "Not me, not your father, not your wife. You." His face twisted as if the words physically hurt him. The male officer spoke gently, like he had seen this 1,000 times. "Sir, turn around and place your hands behind your back." My son shook his head once, sharp, desperate. "Please wait. Just let me talk to them. Let me explain." He tried to look at the guests, at my sister, even at Robert, as if someone might validate him, say this was a misunderstanding, call off the arrest. But no one met his eyes. Not one person stood for him. "Turn around," the officer repeated. This time my son obeyed. His shoulders trembled as he laced his fingers behind his back. The click of the handcuffs was soft, but it echoed through the entire restaurant like a gunshot. My daughter-in-law's absence felt loud too. She didn't need to see this. She had already lived through her own private version of him. The female officer took his elbow lightly. "Watch your step." As they began to walk him toward the front of the restaurant, panic broke through whatever composure he had left. He twisted toward me over his shoulder. "Mom, you're making a mistake. They'll put me in prison. You're sending me to prison. I'm your son." The room was silent except for his voice, loud, frantic, unraveling. People at other tables stared. Some whispered. Some looked away. I didn't. I held his gaze until the officers guided him forward again. My sister's hand found mine under the table, squeezing gently. My husband sat down slowly, like his legs couldn't hold him anymore. He put both elbows on the table and pressed his palms over his face. I heard him inhale sharply, a sound halfway between relief and heartbreak. Our guests sat frozen, unsure if they should speak or stay silent. As the officers reached the door, with my son between them, I spoke one last time. Not loudly, but clearly enough that everyone heard it. "Michael," I said. He stopped walking for a fraction of a second. He didn't turn around, but his shoulders tightened. And I said the words I had waited 3 years to speak. "Actions have consequences." He didn't respond. The officers let him out into the cool night air. The door swung closed behind them with a soft thud. And just like that, for the first time in 3 years, I felt the crushing weight I had been carrying begin to lift. Not gone, but lighter. The kind of lightness that comes when you finally stop pretending. Robert half rose from his chair, his face draining of color. "Wait, what is this about? There must be some mistake." His eyes bounced between Tom and the officers, confusion giving way to panic. "Tom, what's happening here?" My husband exhaled slowly. His voice was steady, but I could hear the exhaustion underneath every word. "Our son has been embezzling from the family business for over 3 years. We filed federal charges this morning." The words hung in the air like thick smoke. Robert sank back down, speechless, his wife's hand clamped onto his arm, as if she'd just been told the room was collapsing. Shock spread around the table like a wave. Disbelief, horror, betrayal. The successful young businessman they admired was not a success at all, but a criminal. Michael stood as the officers guided him to his feet. The older officer removed a pair of handcuffs, and someone gasped. It might have been Robert's wife. It might have been the woman 2 seats down. It didn't matter. All I could see was my son. "Michael James Peterson," the officer announced. "You are under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and bank fraud." He began reading him his rights, words I'd heard 1,000 times on television. But hearing them spoken about my own child felt unreal, wrong, like the world had tilted. Click, the cuffs locked. That tiny sound felt final, irreversible. Michael turned to me with wide, terrified eyes, not angry anymore, not defensive, just frightened. "Mom, please," he whispered. "Don't do this. I can fix it. I'll pay everything back. Just give me a chance, please." I stared at him, my son in an expensive suit that suddenly looked ridiculous, like a costume pretending to be success. "You told me to pack my bags," I said, my voice flat, drained. "You said nobody wanted me at this table." I let the silence settle before finishing. "You were wrong. I'm not going anywhere, and now everyone here knows exactly who you are." The officers led him toward the restaurant doors. He twisted around, scanning the table, searching for support, sympathy, anything. But all he found were horrified, distant stares. When the doors closed behind him, silence fell, heavy, suffocating. I lifted my water glass and took a sip. My hands were steady. My sister finally broke the silence. What happens now? What's the legal process? I was grateful for the question. It kept the emptiness threatening to swallow me at bay. Arraignment is Monday morning, I said. They'll try to set bail, but the attorney expects it to be denied. The amount stolen is too large, and the charges are severe enough that he's a flight risk. After that, trial. Everything will come out. His gambling addiction, the shell companies, every fraudulent transaction. Tom added, we also contacted the IRS yesterday. He never reported any of the stolen money. He'll face tax evasion charges, too. Robert leaned forward, his face pale, his shoulders slumped, as though he'd aged 10 years in a single hour. Tom, Ellen, I have to ask. If you knew he was doing this for 3 years, why wait so long? Why not stop him sooner? I had known this question was coming, and I hated the answer, because I wanted to see how far he would go. I said quietly. My own voice startled me, cold, resigned. I needed evidence that couldn't be brushed off as mistakes or misunderstandings. I needed the truth exposed, completely. I wanted a pattern so clear that no lawyer could twist it into anything but deliberate theft, I said quietly. Then I hesitated, because the next words were the truth I hated most, and because I needed to understand exactly who my son had become before I destroyed the life he built on lies and stolen money. A heavy stillness settled over the table. I could feel the weight of everyone's thoughts pressing in. Judgment, confusion, horror, sympathy all tangled together. Some of them probably thought I was merciless. Maybe I was, but I had lived 3 years with the truth, rotting silently beneath my roof. They hadn't. Then soft footsteps approached from behind. I turned and saw Kelly, my daughter-in-law, my ally, the one person who had lived inside Michael's lies even longer than I had. She came straight to me and folded herself into my arms. Her embrace was tight, desperate, and I felt her whole body trembling. Thank you, she whispered into my shoulder, voice breaking. I held her carefully, aware of the eyes watching us, trying to understand what role this trembling young woman had played in the ambush their friend just walked into. When Kelly pulled back, her cheeks were streaked with tears, but her expression had changed. There was relief, yes, but there was something fiercer too. She looked like someone who had finally crawled out from under a boulder. Where are the kids? I asked. With my mom, she said, brushing the tears roughly from her face. She picked them up from the back table 10 minutes ago. I didn't want them to see any of this. She glanced toward the entrance, where Michael had been led out in handcuffs. I told them their dad had to leave early for work, she said bitterly. They believed me. They always believe me when I make excuses for him. That bitterness, it cut straight through me. How many lies had she told? How many nights had she covered for him while he gambled away stolen money? How long had she carried the illusion of a stable family while drowning under the truth? 3 months later, I sat in a federal courtroom and watched those lies explode under fluorescent lights. The room was smaller than I had imagined. Plain walls, wooden benches, buzzing lights overhead. It felt more like a doctor's waiting room than the place where my child's life would change forever. Tom sat on my right, his hand covering mine. Kelly sat rigid on my left, every muscle in her body tense. My sister sat behind us, a quiet, steady presence. And at the defense table, my son. He had lost weight. His suit hung loose, like a borrowed costume from a life he no longer lived. 3 months in jail will strip the arrogance off any man. Bail had been denied immediately. $200,000 stolen, gambling debts, and a proven history of deception made him a textbook flight risk. The prosecutor, Sarah Chin, a sharp, composed woman in her 40s, stepped through the evidence with surgical precision. She projected bank statements onto a large screen. Each stolen amount highlighted in red. Each forged invoice enlarged until the lies looked almost cartoonish. Summit Equipment Consulting, Meridian Business Solutions, names that had never existed anywhere except in my son's imagination. Then they called Tom to the stand. I watched him rise slowly, older, heavier with grief. The prosecutor asked about the family business. Tom's voice was steady, but every word carried 50 years of history. My father started the company in 1967 with a small loan and a lot of determination, he said. I began working there when I was 16. I always hoped one day to pass it on to my son. That hope now sat shackled at a defendant's table. And when did you discover that your son was stealing from the company? Sarah asked. Tom swallowed, a visible, painful motion, and then he answered. My wife discovered it first, Tom said from the witness stand. She came to me 4 months into her investigation and showed me what she had found. His voice trembled, not from anger, but from heartbreak. At first, I didn't want to believe it. I thought there had to be some mistake. Mistake. That one word cracked something inside him, and he had to pause to steady his breath. But the evidence was undeniable. My son was systematically stealing from the business my father built. The defense attorney, a polished man in his 50s, with silver hair and a suit that probably cost more than one of our monthly mortgage payments, stood up with a smooth, dismissive smile. He suggested that perhaps the so-called theft was merely aggressive business strategy, something that we, being older individuals unfamiliar with modern practices, had misinterpreted. Tom didn't let him get more than 10 seconds into that argument. I've been running this company for 38 years, he said, his voice suddenly hard as steel. I understand the difference between a legitimate business expense and money being funneled into fake companies so my son can pay gambling debts. Silence. The defense attorney sat down faster than he stood up. My testimony. When it was my turn, I walked to the stand with a strange sense of calm. I had prepared for this moment for 3 long years. Every late night, every spreadsheet, every secret. I placed my hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat facing the jury. Attorney Sarah Chin stepped forward. Mrs. Peterson, she said, can you describe how you first discovered your son was stealing? I told them everything. The Tuesday afternoon, I brought soup to my husband's office. The phone call I overheard, the contempt in my son's voice when he said we never checked the accounts closely. What did you do after that conversation? She asked. I went home and started researching forensic accounting, I said. I taught myself to track financial irregularities. Then I began documenting every fraudulent transaction I could find. Why didn't you confront your son immediately? I looked straight at Michael. He stared at his hands. He wouldn't look at me. Because I wanted to see how far he would go, I said. I wanted evidence that couldn't be argued away, and I wanted to understand who he had truly become. The courtroom went dead silent. The air felt thick with the weight of that truth. Even the jury leaned forward. Cross-examination. The defense attorney tried to twist the narrative. He suggested I was vindictive, that a real mother would have tried to help her son instead of building a case against him. I did help my son, I said, my voice steady and strong. I helped him face the consequences he would never have faced if I had enabled his crimes to continue. I helped my grandchildren escape, growing up with a father who would teach them theft and lies are acceptable. And I helped my daughter-in-law leave an abusive marriage before it destroyed her. He had no comeback, none. And I saw something shift in the jury's eyes. Recognition, respect, understanding. They didn't see a vengeful mother. They saw a protector, a woman who had done the hardest thing she could ever do. The verdict: the jury returned after only 4 hours. Guilty on all counts: embezzlement, wire fraud, bank fraud, tax evasion. 4 strikes, 4 blows. Michael didn't lift his head as each charge was read. Sentencing: the judge, a woman in her early 60s, with silver hair in a neat bun, looked at my son over her glasses. "Mr. Peterson," she said, "you stole from your family business. You abused your wife financially and emotionally. You forged documents without remorse. You showed no regard for the people who loved you." Then she paused. The entire courtroom held its breath. "And perhaps your greatest crime," she said, "was underestimating your mother's intelligence and resolve." Her gavel came down with a crack that felt like the end of an era. "The sentence is 8 years in federal prison." Tom squeezed my hand. Kelly let out a sob, a mixture of grief, freedom, and exhaustion. My sister rested a hand on my shoulder, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt something close to peace. Not joy, not satisfaction, but closure. The kind that comes after doing something necessary, something painful, something irreversible. 6 months after the trial, I stood in my garden on a warm Sunday afternoon in late September and watched my grandchildren race across the yard like they had finally remembered how to be children again. Matthew, 8 years old now, was pushing his little sister Emma on the new swing set my husband installed last month. Her giggles rose into the air, bright and unburdened, his patient voice telling her, "Kick your legs, higher, Emmy, higher," floated across the lawn. For the first time in years, their laughter sounded whole. Kelly sat beside me on the patio, a cup of coffee warming her hands as she scrolled through sketches on her tablet. "I got the lease approved for the office space on Market Street," she said, excitement blooming in her voice. "Small, but perfect. 2 consultation rooms, a waiting area, everything I need to start." "When do you open?" I asked. "January, if everything goes as planned. I already have 6 clients lined up through the women's shelter." She took a breath, then added quietly, "I changed my name last week, legally, back to Kelly Morrison. The kids will keep Peterson for now, but when they're older, they can decide too." The divorce had finalized 3 months earlier. Full custody to Kelly, supervised visits only, but not until my son finished his 8-year sentence. The house had been sold to pay the gambling debts and the fraudulent mortgage he had taken out behind her back. Kelly and the kids now lived in a smaller home, a few streets away from us, close to safety, close to support, close to a family that wanted them. A new era for the family. The business was thriving again. My husband had promoted 3 loyal employees who had been ignored when our son held his VP title. Suddenly, the whole place felt alive again, lighter, happier, more efficient. Without hundreds of thousands of dollars vanishing into casino cages, profits rose. As for me, 3 years of secret forensic accounting study had turned into a new role. Financial oversight officer. Every account, every vendor, every transaction. Nothing escaped my review now. No one would steal from this company again. Not while I lived. Healing the children. "Mom, watch this," Matthew called. He pulled Emma higher on the swing, careful and gentle. A year ago he had been quiet, withdrawn, secretive. Kelly later learned he had been lying to teachers to cover for his father's absences, inventing excuses to keep the illusion of a perfect family alive. Therapy was helping. Slowly, he was learning honesty didn't bring chaos. Emma, only 5, had nightmares for months, bedwetting, flinching at loud voices. But 2 weeks ago, she slept through the night without waking. And last night, she'd told her mom, "I'm not scared anymore." I watched them play, my heart full and aching. This peace, this safety, This was why I waited 3 years. Not revenge, not punishment, protection for them, for their future. My sister arrived carrying a warm peach pie, her smile soft and knowing. Kelly's face lit up with a brightness I had not seen since the early days of her marriage. Before everything darkened, and as the sunlight filtered through the trees, warming the patio around us, I felt something settle inside me. Not triumph, not joy, something quieter, deeper, closure, a chapter fully finished, a family finally free. Thank you for listening to this story with me today. If it moved you or made you think about the unimaginable strength mothers can find when pushed to their limits, please subscribe to the Old Woman Stories for more emotional, powerful, life-changing journeys. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to share the next story with you.